My opening logo. Welcome to Evolution Hour. Clickety clack. Analog clocks. Typewriters. The ancient world is passing into history, but is alive and well at tortuganwordpress.com, which is the old website that contains all of that stuff that is freebies relating to the work that I was doing. Yikes, it's close on to 20 years ago. That was the kind of core group that I've been building up onto and now adding on to with the newer books that I'm doing with Jackson, as well as all the fiction stuff. Whoop, way up there. Making slight adjustments, it looks like, with me farther back in the frame. The lighting seems to be a little bit better on me, so I'll look less cadaverous, although with the Halloween, perhaps that's appropriate that I look cadaverous. Which will put a little end game on the discussion of Halloween at the end, a thing that I just added on as a piece of light in the eye. But anyway, as you know, that I'm continuing the source analysis of the creationist book Titans, and we're in their kinds chapter that is basically a reiteration of the usual nothing. That is baraminology, but and virtually all of this chapter is actually just riffing off of creationist material. So it's very incestuous. They're getting to be easily half of the book. References so far are just to themselves, very insular with CMI. And here they're stumbling onto a little issue where they're tiptoeing around a topic they don't actually bring up, but yet is buried there in the sources. And that's, I think, part of the idea that they must consciously have an idea that the sources that they're bringing up have a backstory that they would like the viewer to potentially know about if they ever go to the trouble of checking on the sources. But they're very cagey about presenting that backstory up front. So they're just dangling them into references. So here they're tap dancing around the issue of how they're dismissing natural selection as a creative force. They're accepting natural selection as a real thing, but it doesn't really matter much. It can't produce new information. You know, all that's the standard trope of creationism. But the sources they're citing on it relate to a different issue. Hello, Vesta. That the first is to another of Sarfati's post, this one from 2020, which is, if you go to and read it, and I'll be putting a link into it, it's actually criticizing Randy Gugliuzza of the ICR on the matter of Gugliuzza's rejection of natural selection. This is actually a big deal in this little niche market of creationism, as AIG is firing stuff, lobbing at its cousins CMI and ICR over this sort of thing, because Institute for Creation Research is fomenting a notion that the other creationists in the club aren't going for it all, which is that natural selection isn't really a thing. And there's this CET thing that is the alternative created adaptability that ain't getting anywhere in the regular scientific community and ain't getting anywhere amongst the creationists, which is the ironic part. But none of that's alluded to in this new work, but you'll be able to see it in the post that Sarfati puts up. Curiously, they're citing it as 2014 to 2020, though the current version that I'll be linking to actually says it was updated in 2023, which of course is after the publication date of Sarfati's book, although there's nothing in it that indicates any updating that dates from that recent. So, you know, anybody can figure out what the hell is going on, let me know. It's a funky little bit to deal with in terms of how, and Joel Duff has done material on this flap over the natural selection matter. Nathaniel Jensen has apparently disassociated himself from ICR over it. We're going to be alluding to it in volume 2 of The Rocks Were There. There's going to be a little section on this in one of the appendices, which relates to the whole backstory of the kind of issues of mutations that are out there that don't fit the creationist model. And some of them are directly contradicting this particular CET model that's being put up by Gugliuzza as the alternative to natural selection. So that's that little part. Part two relates to another thing from dear Ken Ham that I stumbled onto from just last February, in fact. Do we need to shift away from human-centered healthcare? Bum, bum, bum. And we'll be putting a link up into that. It is channeling a post from Thomas Williams at Breitbart, which is Culture Camp Central for the Trumpistas and for election conspiracy thinking and all the rest. It was originally founded in part by Steve Bannon, who has then prattled on over to his own little Real America Now podcasts and that, where he hosts a broad range of screwballs and election deniers and nincompoops on. And that's a sidebar. But this relates specifically to this Breitbart post, because what Williams was having a conniption fit about was an editorial in Lancet magazine, the medical journal. CET is nonsense at best. Yes, indeed, it's nonsense on stilts. Because if you come up with an idea that affronts even your fellow creationists, it's absolutely hilarious. It's kind of like the hydroplate theory of biology. Anyway, this Lancet editorial was talking about what they apparently, the creationists and Breitbart apparently think is too woke, which relates to an editorial about embracing ecological equity in health practices. Now, that Ham drew on this right-wing website for the squib itself tells you a great deal right there. It's the sort of stuff that he's drawing on. But underneath their shared obsessions about traditional health, where only human beings matter because they're created by God, was how it avoided dealing with any of the specific examples the Lancet editorial mentioned, which related to, one, the pandemic, which involves lots of issues beyond just individual human survival. Two, the rising problem of bacterial resistance to antibiotics, which kills, as they noted, millions of people every year. And that's an evolution in action matter, which creationism has contributed absolutely nothing to our understanding of it. So right off the bat, then, we're seeing this obsessions about the woke environment and about equity in the sciences, which you get not as screwball an obsession, but still really angry going on with Jerry Coyne over at Why Evolution is True, because he often grumps about infusion of politics and philosophy too much into contemporary science. And you can encounter all of that over in that department. But the intriguing thing was who this Thomas Williams was, because I already had some stuff on Thomas Williams in my reference bibliography, which means he was popping up on my screwball scope before Ken Ham riffs off of him. And also the fact that this was verifying that Williams has continued the techniques that what we were seeing him doing earlier in the stuff that I always aware of. One of them was from, both of these posts, by the way, are from 2017 that I'm going to be putting links up to. One is that Williams repeats climate disinformation. Duh. So another little box on the Culture Camp bingo card gets ticked off. And then the religion side of it is built up, which also would explain why Williams is kind of an okay source for Ham to riff off of, because it's talking about the Christmas story as, quote, historically true. Bingo. So the title, new research suggests Christmas story of the visit by the wise men was historically true. Cue facepalm. So what all of this is reminding us about is that there's one bad method to rule them all. That when you have a mindset like Ken Ham's in the creationism department, is it surprising that they're going to spill over and parasitically rely upon bad sources who have shared Culture Camp ideology, but their method is just exactly as bad? So this was yet another little connector dot on the whole scope, and it is quite independent of whether or not what was in the Lancet article was valid or invalid. I would contend that the main thrust of it was perfectly acceptable and perfectly understandable, that when you're dealing with pandemics and you're dealing with how some of these things are arising because people are getting into areas around the world where little microorganisms are suddenly being able to be transferred from one part of the planet to another at great speed, or in the case of the recent pandemic, when a virus that was apparently normally known in bats gets either expanding through interaction with the local markets, or in a possible but less likely scenario that it was an accidental release from the nearby medical clinic that researched all of these things, which brings to mind the same thing with the Atlanta Center for Disease Control. Is it a wise idea to do medical research facilities located in gigantic cities? Is this a good idea? And so there's a whole bunch of stuff beyond just the Lancet editorial that come up in these issues. And poor old Ken Ham can't get close enough to it because he's not paying attention to the Lancet editorial directly. He's riffing off of Screwball Williams, filtering it for him through Breitbart. So garbage in, garbage out. Absolute mess of a thing. One bad method to rule them all. And so anybody that sees my interactions on Twitter and other social media will know how I'm constantly banging the drum about the methodology issue. One of the things that I have had a point of bringing up to people that are bringing up stuff from Meet the Press, or this week with Stephanopoulos, and any of the Face the Nation on CBS, and interview shows generally, all the way over to stuff like Margaret Hoover doing the Revive firing line and all the rest, is fine and dandy. You can ask about people's policies. Goody gumdrops. We'd love to know what people's policies are, and maybe even mention that they have a policy that might be controversial, and how do you deal with this kind of a thing? Or maybe they don't have a policy on something they should, and you're asking them about an issue that they want to waffle on, and so forth. All of that's perfectly legit to do. And that's the level that definitely goes on in reportage. What is almost invisible in this area is asking about source methods. So fine and dandy, you've got the policy. How did you arrive at the policy? What sources are they relying on? Do they try to fact check those sources? I've observed that all too many politicians are doing it when they would bring up topics and who they're dealing with. Tim Scott, for example, who is kind of trying to sidle away from Trump in the political campaign as he's running for president. Nonetheless, most of the time when he's linking to material, when he does at all, it's to stuff from Fox Trump Pravda. I haven't seen him do too much in the way of Breitbart. That can also give you a measurement of how extreme somebody is when other politicians will be linking to material from Breitbart, just like Ken Ham does. All of that from a source methods direction should mean that reporters should be quizzing politicians on those source issues, and also bringing up the question, which is, do you ever fact check anything? And I would think that it's exceedingly unlikely that the average ideologue is getting anywhere close to looking their gift horse in the mouth. That all they do is to see the headline. And in some cases, some of the posts that are put up, especially, this is something to keep an eye out for when you're looking at politicians or people operating within that frame, is that they'll sometimes want to appear mainstream by linking to a piece that has a topic or headline that seems to support their position, but it's not from one of the more extremist side. I've seen Ann Coulter do this every once in a while, where suddenly out of the blue, she'll post something from the Washington Post, which is not typically the kind of thing that she's drawing on. And yet, when you look at the original posting, you discover that it has information in there that doesn't actually support the position that the person is making. Now, I try to bring that up and say, did you read this post? I don't expect a reply, because the vast majority of politicians, of all political parties, by the way, tend to stay pretty clear from direct engagement on social media like Twitter. But nonetheless, still have to do it. Why aren't reporters doing this more often? I think that anybody who does interact, sees this, or communicates with people who do interact with media personalities should be reminding them and prodding them. Ask some damn source methods questions. Find out where you're going on. The non-answer to it could be hilarious. I would have loved to have seen somebody, instead of simply objecting to Marjorie Taylor Greene's screwball notions, to ask her where she gets her information from. Oh, I think that could be revealing. She may or may not be able to remember where she gets a lot of her information from. And that would be the same situation for Donald Trump. It's pretty clear people have already analyzed Trump, how he often relies on stuff that he hears from Fox News media. And the current blip where he was ranting on about windmills killing whales is most probably derived from Fox Trump Pravda, because they've been making a big deal about it. I've assembled some material for my little packets for the future book Jackson Wheaton I plan on doing on conspiracy thinking and the like, where that will be amongst the topics that will come up. So we're keeping all of our little pile-ups together on that one. So that methodology issue that I'm applying in terms of analyzing what sources creationists use is exactly the same one that you use on absolutely everything. It's a universal toolkit. I apply it everywhere. As anybody that knows me knows, when I even are viewing videos of people whose views I would tend to agree with, I actually look up their sources and cross-check. In fact, next week, a friend of the channel, Colton, brought to my attention in one of our little chat groups on Twitter, some bit from Emil Silvestru, who blatantly misrepresents a primary source that they cited, making a claim about it that's exactly opposite from its actual position. Well, not only did I track down all the material that Colton brought up, but also went a little further, because there's even more dumb knocking around in the little sidebars of Silvestru's thing. So that's going to be a comment for next week. I thought I might be putting it farther on in the year, but I got all the research and that of it done, so I'm going to plop it into the show next week. In fact, it's got so many bloody sources that often the linkages can go beyond the range of how many characters I can put in the video description, so I may have to lop some of them off. I may have to lop off some of the older papers that I've got into this. We'll find out when I get down to posting the linkages on it. So there's a bit. And then presumably we'll be alluding to it at some point. Silvestru comes up in various spots in the new book. And at some point, maybe sticking it into a discussion of the Cretaceous period, or maybe just putting it into his discussion of other matters, because it's effectively a geology post. But thank you, Colton. And you'll get a shout out for next week. So we're at 18 minutes, and in case if somebody pops into the questions that want to ask anything in the live chat, I will start riffing off of that. But I put in a last minute link to a complete sidebar that only occurred because I happened to watch a show tonight on ABC, which is about a Halloween bit where they've got, it turned out to be a series. I thought it was just a single episode, but anyway, every holiday, every Christmas holiday, ABC does a big competition where they go around the country and look at various Christmas decorations that people put up. And so you can get a positive, this runs on for like 3-4 weeks, and you get a practical overload of little cute candy canes and little angels and light shows that people have put up and all this stuff. And I find it intriguing to watch. But they've spilled over to Halloween this season. And so what I thought was maybe a single isolated episode, turns out there's going to be more of them. It's on Sunday night, ABC, 10 o'clock. This turned out to be actually rather intriguing, far more interesting for me than the Christmas stuff, because it related to these really often remarkably cleverer than the Christmas stuff, frankly, displays from people around the country. With some just amazing special effects work that they're using, involving video screens and an entire mine disaster thing that's done inside of this guy's garage. The scaling of it, the meticulous ingenuity of how they run people through all of these little operations, and the technical usage and the using of video, sound effects, mechanical work. I was really impressed by the level of sophistication on this, and this really was running some of the artwork and the material, and they were having to explain, how did they make that funny little angel or the giant ogre that sticks up to 13 feet. The visuals on it were very impressive, and that suddenly reminded me of, oh my gosh, I think of all of the amusement park places that have Halloween displays. Silverwood over in Idaho, which is the biggest amusement park in the region. They picked up tons of stuff as leftovers from Knott's Berry Farm, among other places. Does a scary wood motif during the Halloween period. And I haven't actually been over to see that, which brings to mind, however, why I'm watching all of this stuff. And so I'm basically taking notes on the kinds of interesting ideas that could be done for my amusement park, which I designed, which I'm unlikely ever to build unless I bump into a bunch of billionaires who fall in love with the bloody thing and decide they have to build in that park. And so anyway, I'm still thinking ahead on it. But the idea that there's actually a Transylvania theme zone in the park, that obviously would go into high gear during Halloween. But seeing these ingenious displays that were being done, some of which could easily be keyed into the Cascade Pass theme area or the Land of Chivalry theme area or the science fiction oriented stuff over in Odyssey and so forth and so on. Phantom of the Opera kind of stuff that you'd get into in the Gilded Age or the Victorian London segments. I realized that, my gosh, you could come up with really nice themed elements that could be either standalone units that would be put up or stuff that would be fitting into the interior sections of the park, because there's a huge masses of it that are indoors inside of superstructures. And so I wouldn't want to spare you a link, because this would verify that Nat Park is not a complete fiction in my head. I actually did design a bloody design for an amusement park, and everybody can see it because I'm going to be putting a link in to the TV special that our local KSPS television channel did here back in 1996. It's been a long time ago, called Remember When. And it's a very nice show, an hour long, and I'm at about minute 50. So you'll see a much younger me looking at the design that I was just in the process of coloring in, because I had designed the whole bloody park, and then I had a copy made of that, and then I was coloring in to get all the landscaping details and stuff put in for a visual representation of that, the souvenir map of the park. And there's several spots where there's like a pull out from Ludwig's castle, and it pulls out and out and out and out and out, and you can see more and more and more and more and more of the park around it. Even at that, it's just a tiny segment of the thing. Just think a dozen Disneylands rammed together in one gigantic 2 square mile zone. That was the concept of it. So that gave me an awful lot of interesting little ideas. And that shows you what happens when my brain slips over into relaxation mode while I'm watching a program about Halloween design, because I was genuinely impressed by a lot of the technical work on that. And who knows, some of the people that are like that 17-year-old kid whose family, he designed a whole bunch of amazing stuff. He was the one with the giant ogre that went up. Who knows, maybe 20 years from now, he'll be designing some of the material for the Sure, We're Going to Build It Nat Park. So anyway, that is a little sidebar on there that I'll stick in to show that I've been doing little things in addition to all the major other park projects. So, just to recap, we've got the inability of Sarfati to ever come up with an honest approach to a topic that he brings up, to where they don't have the honesty to actually allude to any difficulties in their model. I'm sure they're running off of the scenario that the last thing they ever want their readers ever to hear is that there is some conflict in the creationist community over a concept. And they're perfectly happy to think that there's conflict and disputation in the scientific community, in the evolutionists. But, oh, no, 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 no. We don't want to give too much about that. And they've already tiptoed into areas where they are really reluctant to drop the boom on their fellow creationists. We'll see how far they go on this. And then finally, they're going to be getting down to where they're going to have to parasitize fiducia on steroids to deal with the feathered dinosaur issue, which they apparently devote 2 full bloody chapters to. So that's going to be really funky. So anyway, I don't see any questions in the live chat area. So we're, and I filled my material out with my Nat Park plug. Take a look at it. It's a really nice little show. Now, Natatorium Park was our old amusement park that was one of these trolley parks. One of the last surviving trolley park would be like Kennywood out in the east. And this is to be differentiated from the big theme parks that were developed largely in a reaction to Disneyland that came up in the mid-1950s. And then you found more and more companies, the Six Flags group, started developing things. And then, ironically, Kennywood was the inspiration for the single price idea that has now completely taken over the industry. So there's a whole backstory in terms of the history of how amusement parks developed and how they shifted the how they would handle the ticket operation. For those who remember Disneyland in its early days, they would have a ticket book. That was an innovation that Disney put in to try to deal with the issue of revenue and preemptively committing people to buying tickets. So when you came into Disneyland, you bought a ticket book, you would have like I seem to think that here's a thing down memory lane. I seem to think it was like $3.95. This will shock you. Yes, for the main admission. And then you bought a ticket book. So you ended up with like a $15 admission, which had this big book of tickets that had A, B, C, D, E tickets. The A's were the chintzy little ones for like 50-cent things, and the big dollar tickets were the ones that for like Pirates of the Caribbean and the Matterhorn and things like that. And you always ran through the A tickets because those were the primo rides. So almost everybody that used the ticket book would end up with a bunch of useless A and B tickets, but they would use up the CDs and E tickets. Kennywood, and as I recall, this would probably have been in the late 70s, early 80s, paid attention to their customers, where they had these long string of the kind of thing you still find in carnivals today, that parents weren't all that fond of carrying around a big roll of tickets. And so they decided to listen to their audience, who said, why don't you just charge us a single admission and then just let us ride what we want? And they looked at the numbers and they thought, okay, let's go with that. And it proved immensely popular with people. Love it. Don't have to worry about any bloody tickets anymore. But the regular theme parks that were all imitating Disneyland, this would include Knott's Berry Farm down in Buena Park, that's the last thing they wanted, because you're making money off of the rides. This is because of the original way amusement parks were designed, roller coasters and Ferris wheels. The builder of the roller coaster made money when somebody rode the roller coaster. So if you have a general admission and anybody rides the roller coaster as much as they want, they're not making any more or less money that way. This seemed counterintuitive. And so the old trolley park thing, Coney Island, for example, before that style of amusement park, you had no real admission at all, and individual rides were run by individual entrepreneurs. So that was simply carried over to the amusement parks that Disneyland was trying to work its way away from. But Kennywood's single price idea, wow, everybody loved it. So gradually, it spread through the field, and Disneyland was one of the last ones to adopt the thing, along with the Six Flags parks and others. I think the Six Flag adopted single price before Disney did. Now it's ubiquitous, but that means you disconnected the load rate attraction bit and all that. Well, that's part of the underlying logic that I had, and I explained all of that to the I think they recorded me for like 3 hours for that KSPS show, of which like 90 seconds is shown in the thing. Is that I had designed Nat Park, my new Nat Park, to be a single price park from the get-go. And so I was breaking down the dynamics of how load rates were working and all that. So anyway, that's a little bit of a backlog in terms of some of the information on there. But it's a wonderful show. It's the poor Natatorium Park was torn down in the 1960s and gone forever, but lived on in my imagination, and particularly the imagination of various people I know who had visited the park. And I visited it in the mid 60s, just before it closed permanently, and it was in threadbare condition. The carousel we've saved, and so anybody who visits Spokane, Washington, for any purposes, if you're down at Riverfront Park, you can go down to see the Big Loof Carousel that occupies a wonderful new building in our Central Park. And it's of interest because it's one of the very few ring carousels, which you grab a ring as you go around. Very few of those operating. And this one is bloody fast. I made a point for my Nat Park research whenever I've gone around and seen a carousel of clocking the speeds of carousels. The one at Disneyland is unless it's changed since I timed it way back in the day, in the 1980s, I think. That one is slow as molasses. It's like 15 seconds to go around. And it's a very old carousel. I think it dates from like 1904 or something. It's slightly older than the one that's, and I think it's partly a composite of varying carousels. But anyway, it's a slow carousel. The Loof carousel that we have here in Spokane is bloody fast. You can feel the wind in your hair, and grabbing that ring, it ain't easy because you're going by at such speed. I think it's like about an 11-second run, and that difference between an 11 and a 15-second is really quite striking. So anyway, a great shout out to the Loof Carousel in the Riverfront Park in Spokane. So anyway, I think that's pretty much it. Not getting any questions locking along in there. I'll be putting the links in as we go. Check out our dear pals trying to make hay on natural selection, and particularly pay attention, put a peg in your head about noticing the connections between how creationism is cross-fertilizing with the Breitbart worldview. These are not disconnected bunch. And so pay close attention. If you see anybody, any politician, citing a Breitbart post, that's an instantaneous clue that their mindset is next door to Ken Ham. They are gullible and very hyper-conservative and rather extremist right off the bat. So let me put up, I think I forgot as well to put up my patrons who have been ever so important to maintaining the whole project over all of this time. So let us put that back up here so everyone can see what's going on there. Bump. Can't do it without you, kids. Just as I can't do without the combined bits between my Social Security, my Patreon account, and the book royalties that trickle in each month. That makes the difference between bills being paid in a month or and obviously, the more patrons there are and the more people that buy the books, the better things are. And holidays are coming up. Great stocking stuffers, although they're big books, so they're going to ram through the stocking. Maybe you want to put them in a box. And I will call attention to the Paralogs of Phileas Fogg up in the corner. 2 books out in that. We're working on the 3rd as we speak, just as I'm also working on the 2nd volume of The Rocks Were There, that Jackson and I. He's been really focused on getting his dissertation done. That takes high priority over book writing. And after all of that gets done, then we'll be able to jiggle and juggle into that other area. But I'm upholding my end. What had originally been 2 chapters have now kind of expanded into 3 because the material on the flood story and the hunt for cryptozoology and the hunt for Noah's Ark and the hunt for soft tissue, all of that stuff has ballooned to the point where it actually is big enough for 2 chapters rather than just 1. And then maybe cosmology one will be the next one that I'll be working on. So anyway, we're little busy little beavers on that. Then let us then conclude with our little pals at let's see where we are. Get that closed up, and let me start up my advert for The Rocks Were There. Rocks Were There, Volume 1. Both the opening intro and the Rocks Were There advert is Dear Peter from Holland, who also has been working with Aaron Ra in his production stuff, and he also does stuff with Jackson. Wonderful material, and he's a very clever and droll visual stylist. I have no capacities in that area, as you can tell from this very rudimentary, training wheel videos that I do. Nothing spectacular on that front. Let me get my window up here. Boop, 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 boop. And there we go. This is the wrong direction. Iced tea. There we go. I was just putting up my advent. Hello there, Purple. Yes, I'll give a recap for you as you just came into the show. I went on about Sarfati and Tay's attempts to bring up natural selection and how they're tiptoeing around the fact that their own posts are actually criticizing ICR and Guliuza without actually mentioning it. So it's a funky little thing that's a little landmine that's buried in their references that they are kind of concealing on the side. And yet the fact that they chose those posts, they could easily have come up with some other issues on natural selection rather than the ones that are going after Guliuza. So I think there may be an element of ass covering here, to where they wanted to be sure that they had staked out a position that if anyone brings it up, they can say, well, we have alluded to this in our book. And then the part 2 related to Ken Ham, who is riffing off of a Breitbart ideologue, Mr. Williams, who is a climate denier and presumably a young Earth creationist theocrat, not unlike Ken Ham. We'll find out in future about that stuff. And it shows that tremendous revolving door of dumb that goes on in political extremism, in the Trumpista angles, because you get an awful lot of Breitbart secondary postings, and Coulter makes use of them. There's a whole bunch of people out in that network, even though they're not in that young Earth creationist frame, but are they in that Coulter camp anti-evolutionist boundary layer, or more probably the anti-abortion thing is the thing that probably is the big runner. And then I put a bit of a rhapsody for 10 or 15 minutes talking about my amusement park design and how I would be wanting to put Halloween theme elements in the various theme zone of the amusement park. And I'll be putting a link up to the little KSPS show from 1996, where yours truly had a brief little period about 50 minutes in where you get to have a chance to look at the super park that I designed. And if I ever get around to doing the park for real, it would be still following the basic elements. I expanded a few areas. They'd be adding on a second trolley car line over in the Gilded Age. I'd be moving the big water spectacle over into the big lagoon at the bottom of the Zauberfluss, so that I would free up the sight line to the grand fountains down there in the big lagoon. Essentially, I've kind of reconstructed the Chicago World's Fair from 1893 as the area around the lagoon where the Grand Natatorium and the various theme zones are connected up to it. So I had thought this through an awful lot from an architectural sense, and you can see a few chunks. If you freeze frame and look at the things, you can see some surprising little bliplets as they were showing segments of the park. And anybody that happens to know somebody that has a few $1 billion burning a hole in their pocket where they need to build the world's greatest amusement park, well, there I am. Okay. So anyway, that gets us up to 40 minutes of blither blather, and I'll be sticking, of course, all the links in, and we'll be proceeding. The one area that will be interesting as we get into the holidays, because I do visit my relatives over in Seattle, and I'm able to do shows in their area. But there are a few boundary layers where I might be traveling at the time when I might be doing a show, and therefore not be in a position to be able to do things at a particular time. So at the moment, I've got things scheduled out pretty steadily, with I think only a bit over the New Year's Eve thing where I'll probably be off for a couple weeks. But we'll give you an alert on that for all of those millions that are hanging on my every word. Anyhow, keep an eye out for wooden penguins, and all the rest of the troubles that can go on in our highly troubled world. And remember, bad methods lead to bad results. So use good methods for goodness sake. And we'll see you all next week. Stay safe, everybody.